We're going to go over the grape problem. The first thing that we notice is that we have a lot of different pieces of information down here at the bottom. And we actually have three different objective functions. We have a revenue objective function, which is the total intake money. We have a cost objective function, which is the total spent money, the amount of money that you have to spend in order to make things work. And then you have a profit objective function, and that would be the amount of money coming in minus the amount of money coming out. So revenue minus cost. That would be your profit function. So we have to determine the number of acres dedicated to each in order to maximize revenue, minimize cost, and maximize profit. And there may be benefits to each scenario based on what is going on in the farmer's life. It may be best to minimize costs if he doesn't have a lot of money up front to spend into his farm so that he doesn't go into debt. But it may be best to maximize profit if he has more money that he can put in. So those are different potential things. Now, in terms of the constraints, we have several. Constraint number one, he has 21 acres for both eating and making juice. And by the way, I probably should have defined my variables already. So X are acres for eating, and Y are acres for the juice, grapes. So if I have 21 acres for this, then that's going to be X plus Y must be less than or equal to 21, because the total amount of acres must be less than or equal to 21. Then he has to have at least 4 acres for eating and 6 for juice. So that would be these two constraints. That's not what I wanted to hit. That would be these two constraints, because the amount of acres for juice must be greater than or equal to 6, and for eating must be greater than or equal to 4. Then we have this last one that causes a little bit of confusion for some people. The farmer has to dedicate at least 1/3 of the acres to each type of grape. Well, what that means, if 1/3 must be dedicated to each type, then let's look at the eating and the juice grapes. So if at least 1/3 must be dedicated to each type, if there are 6 acres total, that means that there must be at least 2 for eating and at least 2 for juice, right? So that means that was kind of annoying me. That means that there have to be less than or equal to 4 for each of these, or for juice if the eating is 2, and for eating if the juice is 2. So what we see in terms of a relationship is that if I have X is the smaller one, then that means that Y must be less than or equal to 2 times as big, because this represents Y and this represents X. If I have this scenario, Y must be greater than or equal to 1/2 as big as X. So both of those show up here. There are actually 2 lines that we have to kind of constrain it within to deal with this particular scenario. So that represents those 2 equations. It has to be less y, the juice grapes have to be less than 2x, and y, the juice grapes have to be greater than or equal to 1/2 the eating grapes. So that's what these two lines are here, and those both intersect at the point 0, 0. But that's not in our region anyway. So this is our region, and we have these 5 points. So the final answer is actually different depending on which objective function you're answering. So the cost function is actually best and minimized at 4 acres of eating and 6 acres of juice, because that minimizes costs. Now also notice that that's the smallest amount of profit, but this may be the best case for the farmer if the farmer doesn't have a lot of money to put into the farm and he doesn't want to get into debt before he gets started. Then another thing to point out is that the maximum revenue is not the same case as the maximum profit. So in this particular situation, the farmer would be in his best interest to put less money in at the beginning and utilize 14 acres for eating and 7 for juice, because then even though the farmer does not make as much money in terms of revenue, in terms of the amount that's intake or brought in, the farmer would make more money when he considers the amount that it cost at the beginning. So the profit is actually better in this particular case, even though the revenue is slightly less.